Andres, you were just at Cesar Chavez Elementary.
hmm
Tell me, how did that go?
Yeah, it
What
was
happened?
great. We had three presentations with students at Chavez Elementary. The first two were with the students, and then the third presentation was with community members and parents. So it was great. The students were very knowledgeable, had a lot to offer, answered the questions very well, and they even did a couple performances. One of the third grade class, um, they sang the song Cesar Chavez by Los Tigres del Norte. I actually texted the video to the Tigres del Norte manager, and he said he's going to get it to the guys. So excited about that. And then some first graders read some poems. So it was just a great visit. I also had a chance to have lunch with the educators and talk to them and learn about their upbringing. A lot of folks who had roots in the fields and whose parents, worked in the fields and now they're educators, preparing the next generation for their futures.
Yeah, what were some of the things that they shared?
We had some of the teachers who came in and talked about how their family were farm workers.
Mhm.
Some of them had actually, some of their family members had actually marched alongside Mike Tata Caesar and others in the farm worker movement. And another teacher came up with her photos when she was living as a migrant in migrant housing here in Davis. And so she had some photos of the old housing and
Mhm.
talked about her childhood and her experience there.
Yeah, did they talk about like the struggles to get an education or anything like that?
We didn't really get into that too
Hmm.
much, but what we did all talk about was just uh, kind of the inspiration that people drew from the farm worker movement, and a lot of them, were just so proud that we were telling the history. And I think part of us, I think part of that, the reason why they were so proud was because of that. I think they probably had their own struggles, but they drew inspiration from this movement. One of the things that we share with folks is that farm workers were the poorest of this nation's poor, yet they were able to persevere even against the most extreme odds. And that was because of their persistence. And I think that's what people really draw from the movement.
Yeah, my mom shared a story quite often about growing up, and in high school, she heard a group of white peers talk about this place called college, and she's like, "What is that?" She felt that they were keeping, they were
Mm-hmm.
keeping college away from the brown people.
Yeah.
And so she went to her advisor, someone she could trust, and was like, "What is this place? How do I get there?" And then she made it happen, and that's how she ended up leaving Gonzales and like coming to San Jose.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of her generation. That was kind of like a common thing. How do you see uh, you know, Chicano, Latinx students being drawn into, furthering their education?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it wasn't long ago that Chicanos and Latinos were going to college. I mean, um, if it wasn't for Sal Castro and young Chicano students, high school students on the east side of Los Angeles walking out and demanding that they be taught about their history, that they be given the same opportunities as their white peers, I probably wouldn't have gone to college, right? And so that was just one generation ago. Now we're seeing larger numbers of Latinos and Chicanos and other folks going to college, and I think that that's important. I think the other thing that we have to start thinking about is now that we're having a greater concentration of folks who look like me going to these campuses, we have to make sure that the campuses also reflect its student population. So everything from the administrators in the campus to the folks who are providing services and the vendors, we have to look at that whole experience and then also make sure that there's cultural programming. It's not enough that folks are just going to college. That's a great thing to do, but it's important that we educate them about kind of where they come from and who they are. And so it's important for us to see cultural programming on college campuses, whether it be talking about Sal Castro and the LA blowouts, or bringing in different types of theater and art that speak to the Latino experience.
Yeah. So, how do you see kind of those goals kind of faring and in comparison to, say 10, 20 years ago? Um, like, do you see any progress in that direction?
Absolutely, there's progress in that direction. You just by the number of Latinos who are going to public universities in large numbers. So that alone would suggest that there's been a lot of progress that's been made. I saw the progress up close and personal this summer. In August, the United Farm Workers had a march from Delano to Sacramento, and I was on that march for different parts of it. But it was incredible to see all the sons and daughters of farm workers who had gone on to different professions, who had escaped the fields because they were able to go to college, and now they were coming out to help out in different capacities. They were removed from the fields, but they still had connections to it, and so they were showing up with waters and Gatorades and snacks, and providing financial donations. And so that alone, was also a testament to the fact that we've made a lot of progress. But we still see that large numbers of Latino and Black students, are falling behind. There's a big achievement and equity gap that we need to start looking at within our education system. Again, it's not enough to get students to college. The goal is to get them to college and then graduate, right? And I think that's what we have to start thinking about is how do we get these folks to school, but also make sure that after 4, 5, 6 years that they do in fact graduate and they can go on to building their lives.
Yeah, talking about that march, that was really inspiring. Um, how did you feel during that time?
Yeah, the march was probably the most connected I've ever felt to my Tata Caesar's legacy. Um, I remember being there the first day and marching, and it just being so captivating, and then I tried to go out as much as I could, and before you know it, I was out there so much that the UFW's president asked me to would I mind leaving my job for 2 weeks to help out on the march a little bit, and so that's what I began doing. But it was just it was a perfect example of how the spirit of the farm worker movement is still alive. Um, one, it spoke to the current day issues facing workers, and that's why we were there, and that's why we were marching. But the march was also a great reflection of the progress that's been made. Every quarter mile, every half mile, there was support of folks, and so that was just incredible. And then it started with a couple hundred people in Delano, and by the time they got to Sacramento, 7,500 people were marching, which was incredible.
It took Newsom almost the full month for him to sign that into law. Um, what was your reaction, I guess, to the delay there?
Things in our movement have never come easy. We've always had to work hard. The idea of farm workers and supporters marching in August through the Central Valley to get a piece of legislation passed that was really going to afford them the same rights as other workers just goes to talk about the things that farm workers and our movement has to do to get the attention of people like Governor Newsom. So the fact that he took as long as he did, of course we'd have liked to have seen it done sooner, but what has remained true about our movement over the years is that we never give up. We never give up, and they had introduced that piece of legislation 2 years before. He had vetoed it. They reintroduced it, and they said we're going to Sacramento, irregardless of whether he signs or doesn't sign. And it was really the persistence and the organizing of people coming together that led to him signing it. And so we were very excited when he signed it. But we're no strangers to a hard fight, and the movement is always willing to fight hard, regardless of who it is. That's what we do, and that's what defines us.
Um, do you find that organizing farm workers today is more difficult than during your Tata's time?
I don't organize farm workers on a daily basis. My work is much different in nature. Organizing farm workers has always been one of the hardest things to do. And yes, organizing farm workers continues to be tough. There is a lot of because of our broken immigration system, the threat of deportation is a real threat for workers, and so they're oftentimes nervous about joining a union because employers and others will intimidate them. So yeah, the climate for organizing is tough for the most part, but I think this recent bill that was signed by Governor Newsom will really make it more safe for farm workers to express their interest in joining a union.
Yeah, so has there been more people signing up to be a union member since that?
So the law goes into effect, I think, later this year,
Okay.
and so yeah, I assume that you'll begin to see some fundraising. I'm sorry, some union organizing drives. But the UFW has actually been signing some contracts in the New York area with farm workers in New York. So you are seeing a lot of workers. There is a resurgence amongst workers looking to join a union.
Well, that's exciting. Um, okay, I guess what do you find is going to be the next step in that direction? In the fields today to get people organized.
You know, again, the folks at the UFW would know much better than I do. My
Okay.
work is different, but
Yeah.
I know that they're working towards immigration reform and making sure that there's a pathway to citizenship for farm workers. Again, a lot of folks are nervous when it comes to speaking up for themselves at the workplace because the fear of deportation, because the fear of potentially having to leave their families behind. So I think us working towards a immigration system that works for people, that leads to a pathway to citizenship, would really kind of help with not just unionization, but with workers understanding that they have rights and workers um, really advocating for themselves and their families.
Yeah. Let's see about that. So can you talk a little bit more about yourself and you do like speaking events,
Yeah.
and so your tata is obviously a big part of your legacy, and I'm curious, you know, as you've grown up, and I'm curious like what stories or lessons of inspiration that you can share with us from him.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in the farm worker movement, and so I participated countless marches, rallies, picket lines, union conventions, political campaigns. I also grew up at the headquarters of where the UFW Cesar Chavez Foundation there in La Paz. It's also now the home to the Cesar Chavez National Monument. So my life has I've really grown up in and around the movement. I now serve as the executive director of the National Chavez Center. We're the arm of the farm worker movement that really is tasked with preserving Caesar's legacy and telling the history of the farm worker movement. And we do so through the management of historic properties, including the property that we have up in Keene, California, as well as the 40 acres in Delano. And then we also do it through educational and cultural programming. Part of that programming is going out and doing the speaking that we've been doing here for the last month or so. Communities throughout the country have been celebrating my grandfather's life and his work since he passed away 30 years ago. This coming Sunday, April 23rd, that'll be the 30th anniversary of his passing. And so we like to go out there and share with folks. And now we're not just seeing school students. We're seeing corporations. We're seeing local and county governments, community groups, everybody wanting to understand a little bit more about that history. And so yeah, that's some of the work that we do. In terms of some of the lessons that we've learned from my Tata Caesar. I didn't have the opportunity to meet him. I was born just 9 months after he passed away, and but I think through his work we were able to see a lot, and I've been able to talk with folks who worked with him, and I go back to this idea of just never giving up. He used to tell people, "You only lose if you give up and if you stop trying." And so I think that really is the most valuable lesson that we can take from his life. When you look at his life, the truth is that he had more defeats than he had victories. but it was how he responded to those defeats that defined his legacy. When he got knocked down, he got right back up. When things were unfair, he would work to make them more fair. And when people told him no, you couldn't, he would respond, "Si se puede."
Um, so, how has education played a part in your life?
Yeah, education has played a huge part in my life. I'm the first to admit that I probably could have been more focused in my high school years. But when I went to Cal State University, Bakersfield, it was the first time I had a teacher who looked like me. And having a teacher who looked like me uh, proved to be proved to have a tremendous impact on my educational kind of attainment and my educational process. When I got to college, again, this is going from a student who wasn't the most disciplined, wasn't the most interested, but as soon as I had people who looked and talked like me and I was conversing with these folks, I got really engaged. And so, my I would say that my intellectual curiosity and kind of my love for education. Uh, I was a late bloomer, but it really took off my freshman year of college, and that summer of my freshman year going into college.
Cool. And so you're going to be the featured speaker at the UC Davis Cesar Chavez Youth Leadership Conference. What will be your message that day on May
Yeah,
6th?
I think it's what we've been talking about.
Mhm.
I can't sit here and think that I have anything to offer to the students that maybe others can't. But what I have is I have the ability to tell stories, and I think I plan to go there and tell some stories about our movement, about my Tata Cesar, and ultimately let them know that Cesar Chavez wasn't much different than any of them who were in that room. Uh, Many of them look like him. I'm assuming that many of them didn't come from rich or powerful families. And when you compare their lives to Caesar's life, it's pretty similar. And so I just hope that them seeing my Tata Caesar being able to achieve his dreams gives them a little bit of inspiration to know that their dreams aren't out of touch as long as they work hard and they persevere.
Can you tell us one of those stories?
I think the best story that I have is actually my dad's story, and it was my Tata giving that advice exactly. My dad was 25 years old, 26 years old. He had just started working in the UFW's political department, and they were working to get a vote in favor. They were trying to stop an appointment of an individual to a certain board, and so they needed 26 votes, and my dad had organized up and down the state with others to do sit-ins, to have constituent meetings with elected officials. They lobbied at the Capitol. There was just a lot of effort going into this one vote that was going to take place in the state Senate. And as you all know, when legislative session is kind of happening, they usually wait until the very last minute to take up the most controversial bills, and that often go into the wee hours of the night. And this was one of the most controversial votes. And so, on the final day of legislative session, my Tata Cesar, my dad, and 300 farm workers were there, and they were watching the vote take place in the state Senate galleries. And as that vote began to take place, they really began to see, if those months of hard work was going to pay off. And one by one, the senators began to vote, and they came up one vote short. And my dad, this was his first big challenge in that role, and he just felt horrible. And the way that he tells it is that he was embarrassed. He felt like he let himself. He felt like he let his dad down. He felt like he let the farm workers down. And so my grandfather walked over to the workers, consoled them. They put them back on their buses, and the farm workers left. And he walked over to my dad. By this point, it's about midnight, after midnight, and he says, "Come on, Paul, let's drive home." My dad says, "Yeah, I'm not going to sleep anyways." Now, the drive from Sacramento to where they lived was like a 5-hour drive, so they were going to be driving until the early hours of the morning. And after some time in the car, my Tata finally looks over at my dad, and he asks him, "Are you upset?" My dad responds, "Yeah, I feel horrible. I feel like I let you guys down, and my Tata says, well, did you try as hard as you could? Dad says, yeah, I did everything I could possibly do. I don't know what else I could have done. And my Tata says, did you leave any stone unturned? My dad says, I did everything that we did everything that we thought we needed to do. We worked as hard as we could. And after my dad's done kind of giving his answer, my Tata pauses for a second, and he looks over at my dad and he says, Paul, and he actually said, Mijo, you have to understand that our work isn't like a baseball game where after 9 innings, the team with the most amount of runs wins and the other team loses. It's not like a political race where on election night, the candidate with the most votes is elected and the others aren't. In our work, La Causa, you only lose when you give up and when you stop fighting. And so tonight, we're going to go home, we're going to get some rest, and we're going to get back to work because there's a lot of people counting on us. And that was just the way that they responded to things. They simply never gave up, and that's the best example. And so I think, a story like that may be a part of my message to the students, because here we are all these years later, Cesar's being celebrated, farm workers are in better positions than they've ever been today in the state of California. And that's because the persistence and the hard work of a lot of people.
What were they trying to fight? What were they trying to get past?
They were trying to block a person being appointed to a board.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm curious, what are some of the biggest challenges today for farm workers?
Yeah, I think farm workers continue to have a lot of challenges. What we have to understand is that workers aren't just workers. They go home to a lot of issues. And so I think there's the issues in the workplace. For the most part, workers still work in the shadows, and there's still a lot of mistreatment of workers in the fields. But they also go home to neighborhoods that are underfunded. Their schools are underfunded. The schools for their children are underfunded. We saw in the Pajaro Valley area the poor infrastructure and what it looks like. I get pissed off every single time I see the sons and daughters of farm workers having to sit outside of a Taco Bell or a McDonald's so they can do their homework because they don't have access to broadband. And so we certainly are better off today than we were in the 50s and 60s. But I think there's still a long way to go, especially as it relates to the issues outside of the workplace. Making sure that the sons and daughters of farm workers, and of all people who are poor, really making sure that they're afforded the same opportunities as everybody else.
One of the things you touched on is just now is, the schools being underfunded. One of the people that I was talking with in preparation for this leadership conference at UC Davis, she was talking to me about how underfunded a lot of the schools are, and therefore they don't necessarily have money for counselors to kind of get students knowledgeable about what we're talking about, the next steps, getting out of poverty, getting an education. It's definitely a difficult. It's a huge problem.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Have you done this event before, this conference?
I have. I don't know that I was the keynoter, but I did offer 5 minutes remarks. It's a wonderful conference. I think they have 1,500 to 2,000 students who come out. The organizers do a great job. The university is very supportive of it, and I think it's a model for the rest of the country to look at.
Okay. What did you enjoy about it?
I think anytime you can get a large number of people together working for a common good or for a good cause, in this case it's elevating the leadership skills of young people, that's there's just something powerful about it, right? So to see 1,500 mostly Latino students coming together with the aims of wanting to develop their leadership skills, I think was incredible. And I think that was probably the most rewarding thing I got out of it all.
Great. So, yeah, what is life like for you now? I mean, you're doing all these talks and stuff. What else?
Yeah, my role as executive director at the National Chavez Center keeps me busy. But it's an exciting busy. Though I have been on the road and I do get tired. It's good to come out and talk with people and see that people are still moved by the work and people still want to make a difference. And I especially enjoy talking with the students, just seeing how smart they are and the ideas that they have. I think really gives me the strength to kind of to persist and continue on. But beyond that, I make sure to take time for myself,
Yeah.
and spend time with my girlfriend and my family and my friends. I have a niece now, who's just the light of all of our family's life now, and so it's important to take time for yourself as well.
Tell me a little bit about the National, Historic Center or
Yeah,
Monument or, yeah.
so the Cesar Chavez National Monument just celebrated its 10th birthday in October of last year. In 2012, President Barack Obama proclaimed it a national monument, and so it's the 398th unit of the National Park Service. Um, it's located in Keene, California, where the UFW's headquarters are at. That headquarters is about a 187-acre property, but only 3 of those acres were donated to the federal government to establish the national monument. And so when you visit, you'll be able to visit a visitor center. At that visitor center, they have a exhibit that talks about the 1965 Delano grape strike. In there's also a replica of farm worker housing, what it was like in the 50s and 60s and prior to that. And then there's actually Cesar's office there. So that building that you're walking through was actually the headquarters of UFW. And so Cesar's office has remained the same since his passing in 1993. And you can sit there, and it's kind of a time capsule of his office that you can see. Once you finish up at the visitor center, there's a memorial garden where Cesar, my thought that Cesar and my Nana Helen are buried at. You can pay your respects there. And then the third part of it, which you can see from outside the gate now, but eventually you'll be able to walk through it, is Cesar and Helen's home. And so that sums up the National Monument. But it's a beautiful property, and we encourage and always invite people to join us.
Nice. Thank you. Is there anything else you want to share?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, thank you.